Hello and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Olive Esplin and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on August 13th with Catherine Grant. She will be giving a presentation entitled Getting to Know the New Merge Experience in Family Search Family Tree. If you would like access to a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be talking about researching your Native American ancestors. Before we begin, here is a little bit about our speaker. James has over 43 years experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy's Star blog. He has served as a family history volunteer for 21 years and has presented at expos and conferences around the US, Canada, and Europe. He is a member of the board of directors of the Family History Guide Association and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. James is a professional photographer and has 7 children, 34 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. If James is ready, we will turn the time over to him.
Okay, today we're going to be talking about researching your Native American ancestors. And just one note of clarification. Um, of course, they're known as Indians as well as Native Americans. And the two terms are fairly interchangeable. Um, One of the indications of it is that there's still the names of many of the tribes are still on as Indian reservations. So uh, there's not a whole lot of difference, and it, I guess you could say there's not something that's overwhelmingly politically correct for that. So just to clarify a point, now let's get moving here. Um, the images in this presentation, some of them, as you'll be able to recognize because they're in duotone, were taken by Edward Curtis, who was born in 1868, died in 1952. He is acknowledged as being, if not one or two of the best, most prolific photographers from the Indian community throughout the country. And his original photographs and the prints from the originals are collector's items and are worth a lot uh, worth a lot of money. Let's say they're very, very desirable. And one of the things that I've had for a long time is a museum quality print of the opening slide, which is the some of the Indians who live within the boundaries of the Canyon Touche National Monument in northeastern Arizona on the right on the Diné Nation or Navajo Indian Reservation. Okay, so let's get moving here. There are approximately 326 Indian land areas in the United States, and they're administered as federal Indian reservations. They're called reservation pueblos, rancherias, missions, villages, communities, etc. They're as small as a couple of acres. They're as big as many hundreds of square miles. Um, and there are 574 federally recognized tribes, meaning not every tribe has its own reservation. So this is a map of the federal and Indian lands, both. So you get different colors of the federal and Indian lands. And you'll notice that in the western part of the United States, nearly high percentages of the states of Arizona and Utah and Nevada and parts of Idaho and other states are federal land. And that is one of the kind of issues that exists out here in the West right now. and has for 100 years or so. First, right off, we don't believe the Indian princess story. The Cherokee princess is a recurring figure in American family lore, and I've had it a few dozens of times, maybe more than that, have people come and tell me that our family had a Indian princess in it, and we'd like to trace back and see who that was. And it's not uncommon, and the story's frequently a myth. I mean, out of all of the probably into the dozens, if not hundreds, of inquiries I've had over the years, uh, looking at Native American or Indian genealogy, um, I would guess out of that number, I've only had a small handful, maybe less than a dozen people who actually turned out to have Native American ancestry. So it's one of those things that if you have Native American ancestry, you probably know it, and you probably know the tribe, and you probably know the connection. If it's something that's way back in your history, it's probable that it may not be correct, and it may, if it has to be, it is probably something that you'll need to investigate and learn how to do, just like what we're doing here today. Um, and to note the reason why this is because there's a misinterpretation. Uh, a daughter of a chief of a particular tribe, or the person in charge of that tribe, uh, it's kind of they kind of get the idea that it's a princess. Well, there's no such thing as princesses, so it's not something that was in the structure of any of the tribes. Now, maybe what we get the closest one for that story that of a historical figure who was an ancestor is a uh, a woman who was called Pocahontas. That's kind of uh, the name that was evolved over the years that they were referred to. That's not the name she went by in life, and it was a nickname that meant playful one because uh, she was very curious. She also, uh, back in the 1500s, married an Englishman and ended up going to England and being in England and then coming back to the colonies. And she has children, and it's estimates that there could be from 30,000 to now claimed as many as 100,000 people who are descendants of Pocahontas. Now, that's not unusual in the context of the early colonial people. If you're talking about, for instance, Mayflower passengers or anybody who settled in a particular area, the Jamestown colony and others, all of those that survived that now have thousands of descendants. So this is probably the case. If you do have, if you are related to Pocahontas and you want to think that and to think that that's a possibility or a story in your particular um, uh, family, what I would suggest, the first thing I always suggest is take a DNA test from Ancestry or from MyHeritage and see if you have any African American, uh, Native American ancestry. See if they have any back, some that shows up. If you do, then there's an incentive there to go ahead and do the research and see if you can make a connection. But don't be disappointed if you can't connect Pocahontas, because as I just mentioned, there's hundreds of Indian tribes throughout the country. Here's a link out here to this, and it's called Pocahontas Descendants, and it's a book that tells all of the descendants through uh, a number of years. And there's a 700-page book here that tells people who have traced their ancestry back. So there's a good place to start. And another thing that's kind of is very important to understand is that in 2020, which is the last census that we have available, Native Americans and Alaskan Natives uh, alone or in combination represented less than 3% of the US population, according to the Census Bureau. So it was not, it's, uh, obviously, the further back we go in time, the higher the percentage rate was of Native Americans compared to the rest of the population of the United States. So as I mentioned, take a DNA test. It would be you probably have the best chance of tracing back to colonial times here in the United States by doing a DNA test with Ancestry. Uh, and Ancestry and MyHeritage are really the only two uh, websites that have databases with records large enough to make a difference in tracing back something that may have happened back in the 17 or 1600s or 1700s. So it's a good idea to look at that as being an option to start out with. This is kind of the summary of what Ancestry has on that DNA section of their website. So this is something you should probably get a start at, look at, and then you can see what was involved. And it's important to remember that your DNA test is not going to be any proof of descent from any particular tribe. Many of the people that I've dealt with over the years have uh, had the incentive that they had to become interested in doing genealogy for an Indian ancestor was that they wanted to or thought that they might be able to get registered with one of the tribes and have the benefits of tribal membership. Um, that was the goal. And as a result, in the United States, many of the tribes, not all of them, but many of the tribes have simply stopped taking any additional uh, enrollment, and by particularly people who may have just a single line back on of genealogy back to a Native American. So this is it's an interesting idea, but in one case, that recent case that I had at the BYU Library Family History Center was and I was always cautioning people who came in and asked about if they had, they wanted to investigate their Indian ancestry. And one individual came in and said he'd need some help getting started on doing more research in his Indian ancestry. And I said, well, and I went into the story about it's maybe not possible, and you should take a DNA test and get involved. And he said, well, I don't think I need to do that because not only am I enrolled, my children are here at BYU with reservation scholarships from the Indian tribe. So that and kind of goes back to the people that and even some of the people that work with in the BYU library have definite contacts or ancestry in Native Americans. So there's resources at the library for people who are more than familiar with how to do the research. And if you do get to that point and you take the DNA test, if you don't show any Native American ancestry, then that doesn't really prove anything one way or the other. It's kind of negative evidence that didn't show up, but that doesn't mean that you don't have Indian ancestry. It just means it didn't show up in the DNA test. So uh, it may or may not, a DNA test may or may not tell where it is. And the only way you're going to be able to establish that is through careful and systematic uh, genealogical research using contemporary records. In other words, going backward in time using records that will connect you to ancestry. And one thing that is absolutely necessary is that to get the results of a DNA test, to have that have any value, particularly, is that you need to be sure you have a fully sourced, supported family tree. In other words, you need to do the genealogical research and get as much information from records that you can possibly obtain uh, in order to make the jump to uh, have a DNA test that shows Native American. And getting back to that point, and genealogical research gets more difficult as you go back in time. So the further back the connection might show up is when you're probably having the most difficult. And one thing that's really important is that you don't jump back in time without valid historical sources, uh, working back one generation at a time. Uh, and if you've already have the names in some of the big websites like Family Search or MyHeritage or Ancestry, then in their family tree, then you need to go back and verify that that information is correct because there are a lot of different are a lot of family trees that are not reliable at all. So this is a common, very common suggestion, and it's something that I would basically tell everybody to do when they start learning about doing their own family history. And that is to just learn about as much as you can about your ancestral history. And make sure that when you do learn about the ancestral history, that you also spend some time learning about the general history. And it would be extremely helpful if you need to get involved in and learn a lot about the Native American history as as interfaced with the European uh, immigrants and other immigrants over time. So this is an area of genealogical research that depends extremely uh, its very emphasis is very much on the actual history, the historical records, historical events, and how the individual tribes evolved, and all of the information concerning uh, the formation of the reservations and the history of the Indians on the particular reservation and across the country. And all of this is part of the genealogical research that you need to do. This is where I would start. I would start out by doing something that's pretty straightforward, and that is making sure you have a copy of every U.S. federal census record for every person in your family tree that lived when the records are available, essentially from 1790 to 1950. And so I would suggest that you go through this process. And the answer is that you may find that just simply doing the test, the names through the census records may be the key in establishing a connection to uh, an Indian, a particular Indian tribe. And of course, as I mentioned a moment ago, taking a DNA test does not make that determination. That doesn't tell you, it tells you have Native American uh, genealogy of DNA, but that doesn't mean that it can be traced back to any particular uh, tribe. There are lots of helps online that talk about establishing Indian ancestry. This is one from the U.S. Department of the Interior, and all of these I have in this particular presentation. I've tried to put up the address of the various websites that I'll mention. So if I didn't put it up for some reason, you can just do a Google search for the name of the website. Like this would be Department of Interior and establishing Indian ancestry, and look for that. And this is kind of the key phrase that's used on this Department of Interior website. It says when establishing descent from an Indian tribe for membership and enrollment purposes, the individual must provide genealogical documentation. The documentation must prove that the individual lineally descends from an ancestor who was a member of the federally recognized tribe from which the individual claims descent. So basically what it's saying is you that you've got to go with the historical records and not make a pre-decision uh, or decide in advance that you're going to be related to a particular tribe. And you just have to follow the historical records, the actual historical records that you can find, and in doing your general, what I would call uh, good genealogical research, and making it so that the records do support whatever conclusion you come to. Now, somehow, one other thing that seems to come up quite frequently is to saying, A, there aren't any records, so how do you ever prove it? The answer to that is there are records, and yes, you can go back and use those records to establish a valid genealogical connection with one of the Indian tribes. In this case, you can start here with the research wiki on the FamilySearch.org website and look at the American Indian census rolls that were taken. And so there are census records for for some of the tribes in the United States. I don't think that, it's not possible to have that all the census records have covered all of the Indian peoples. And here is a connection to this, the census rolls here on Family Search. So you can look for the Native American census rolls from 1885 to 1940. And there's the National Archives series for those records. Now, in addition to the census records, there are a lot of other records, and I'll be talking about that just as I go through the presentation. Here's an example of coming from the National Archives microfilm publication of Colville, Washington, Indigenous People Records of 1885 to 1940. And these are up in Washington State, and they're primarily, there's different tribes here of the Indians, including the Nisbets and some others. This is what the sheets look like. So there's an Indian name and an English name in these particular records. And then there's information about the relationships. And this is about as good a record as you're going to find. That's the good news. The problem is that you'll notice on this record, there's no, they haven't filled in the census or the Indians tribe. So you're going to have to look through the whole document to see if there's information that ties any group of records into a specific tribe. Now, one of the reference materials that is probably the most used, and there are the 5 tribes: the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminoles, and these are known as the 5 tribes, and they were all displaced from their historical Native American locations in the east, towards the East Coast and in Florida, etc., and ended up being moved forcefully into Oklahoma, then put into the reservations. And so there's a long story there. But many people can begin this process of connecting by doing some records, looking for going back in time until you're in the tribal, when it's possible that you're in the tribal realm, and then and even closely related. In other words, when you find out none of your ancestors lived any places where the Cherokees or the other Indians were living, then you're probably not related. But if you trace them back to Oklahoma Territory, there's a better chance of being related to the direct line. And I know that 1 or 2 of the people that I've helped over the years that have connected did so because they found the connections through the census records, and then found the specific names that they needed to in the Dawes Commission enrollment records. And so this is a reference material that tells you those people that were put into the reservations and from these 5 particular tribes, called the 5 civilized tribes. The reason why they were called the civilized tribes is they had their own written language. And remember, when you're going to get into this whole situation of doing this research, that you really need to focus on the fact that there are 574 recognized tribes. And there are more than that, different tribes, but those are the only ones that have our status with the government of being recognized. And this is from the National Atlas, which is a Library of Congress resource. And the National Atlas, this map shows the general area of where each of these tribes was located and is located today, where you might find those. And also, I would suggest that you want to have a family tree on Ancestry. You can have a family tree on Family Search for free, but if you have an Ancestry account and have a fund and put your family tree data on Ancestry, today Ancestry is using artificial intelligence to complete your ancestry and assist you in going back in time. So it's generally worth the cost of a subscription if you're serious about conducting research back. And you can see from this list of some of the data collections that are on the Ancestry website that there's lots of information there that can be found. There's a few free indexes, and that means you can go ahead and look at this. And in the case that, for example, if you don't want to pay for an ancestry account, you can at least use the information on Ancestry to do some research by using the Ancestry library editions of their websites. You go into a library that has the Ancestry and you'll have the library edition. The main difference is that the library editions are not as complete as the full subscription to an Ancestry account. In addition to that, there's no way to put a family tree up on the library edition. So you would actually have to have a subscription to Ancestry in order to put your own family tree information into the um, into a family tree. And the records of the tribal records are dependent on the access restrictions of the individual tribes. And as I mentioned, the tribes, to some extent, some of the tribes have already closed their enrollment. In other words, they would not even think about adding anybody else to the tribal list. On the other hand, if the enrollment is open, then they will have some very specific rules about what kind of information that they would accept before allowing an individual to apply uh, for tribal enrollment. Now, as a place to go, the National Archives has extensive Native American records. That's the good news. The bad news is that many of those records are still not digitized and not available outside of doing research directly in the National Archives. And so this is another kind of major step that you would need to do in order to get that information. I'm recalling one person who came to me and asked for information or help with information. We determined that yes, very quickly determined that the National Archives had all the records, but they're all sitting in the National Archives and none of them had been digitized. And this was having to do with Alaskan Native Americans who were living in the Aleutian Islands. You can also research by topic on the National Archives in the catalog, which will help you get information. And these are the kinds of records that you might find for any one of the given tribes. Um, Let me kind of reiterate this, that it's never a good idea when you're starting out to do a genealogical research to jump back to something that you're trying to prove uh, before you've done all of the steps necessary and documented each of uh, the generations in your back to that particular area or time that you're looking for. This is the same thing we have with people who are looking for American Revolutionary War membership in the Daughters of the American Revolution, or uh, any one of the what you would call affinity or groups of people who have genealogical relationships. And so you have the same challenges. And it's many times I've had people come to me and say, well, I know I'm related to this guy that was in the Revolutionary War, or who was on this reservation. I just can't make that last connection. I've got somebody here and I just can't connect them to the next person. The answer is you haven't, that you've started back and assumed that you're related without going through the process of doing the research, going systematically back to and accepting whatever it is that is shown by the research. And that isn't to say that it's not that it's easy or that it's but it is usually doable to get back into that well, now if you're trying to trace ancestry back into the early colonial times in the United States, then you're still going to have all of the difficulties of doing research back then of the handwriting recognition and all of that. Now, artificial intelligence is making inroads both on ancestry and on family search and helping to search old records. And as time goes on, it's going to become more doable using AI. But right now, you're still going to have to do the traditional research to get back to a lot of the records that are necessary. So here's some other additional areas. These are all from the National Archives records on that's from the National Archives on website, nara.gov. And there's even more records. So here's research guides to all of the different kinds of records. So if you want to really know how to get into the record sets that are available on the National Archives, it's one thing to find out that they have the records. It's another thing to find out that the records are, one, not indexed or cataloged, and that the way the National Archives often shows their record sets is by how many cubic feet of records there are, or even up to cubic yards of records that are available. So, for instance, in a case, let's say your people possibly have come from the tribes along the northern part of the United States, and they were on the Rosebud Reservation. Well, you can find all the Rosebud records for the reservation that has names of all of the people involved, but there they are in the National Archives. And when you go to the catalog, it says Rosebud Reservation records, and they'll say whatever number of square feet or whatever of records there are. That's all you're going to get. And when you go to the National Archives to do research, you'll be asking to get those records, and you may have to spend a considerable amount of time working back through all of those, the way those are. And also taking in mind that even though the records may be in the National Archives, they could be physically located at one of the National Archive locations throughout the country. So depending on which reservation that your Indian ancestors should have been on or was rated to, those records are going to be in different parts of the country. And so that's one of the other research things that you need to do is to determine through doing your genealogical research in a systematic and source supported way. And when you get back to that point, then understanding that you may very well have to go to one of these National Archive locations to look at further records. So here's more. I'm just kind of going through the help places for showing much specific information about how to do research into the records that are sitting in the National Archives. And it shows you the types of records, the topics of the records, and the people that could be found there in the records, including tribal members. And I would suggest that when you look for and find a record set that is on the National Archives or listed as part of the National Archives collections, do a separate search for those particular reservation records or whatever they are, and just to see if they've been digitized and are available either through Family Search or Ancestry or one of the other websites. Now, a lot of the records back to the time of the establishment of the BIA, or Bureau of Indian Affairs, uh, which began in 1824, and there are uh, large blocks of records from the reservation managements under the direction of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And those records are going to be found in those cubic feet of records that I've been mentioning. And so this is just another avenue of approach to doing that kind of research. And there may be, it may be, if you're fortunate enough to have it to fall in the category, it's that these records have been digitized and are searchable, whether it be directly on a BIA website or on one of the other major websites. Now, another kind of reality that was one of the sad history things that happened with the Native American, the Indian population, was Indian boarding schools. The effort was made to, in a sense, eradicate uh, American Indian culture as an entirety. And the reason that and the way that was done is to mandatorily take the children as they reach school age and put them into boarding schools around the country. And then these records, one of the difficult things about the boarding schools is that they were prohibited from speaking in their native languages, and they were also stripped of the name that they had through uh, their connections to the reservation. So the children were given English names, and they were absolutely punished if they tried to use their own Indian name or tried to speak in their native language. And from there, we can go to some of the repositories of records outside of the National Archives, and that is the Oklahoma, things like websites. This is an example website of the Oklahoma Historical Society and their listing of additional Indian archives and records that are available. Uh, Here's another collection, and this is the collection of uh, pictures by uh, the famous Indian photographer. And basically, these are all of the different prints. Um, so the story here is that you need to keep looking and keep learning, and there's nothing really different about the way that the genealogy is done for trying to see whether you have a connection to a Native American person than any other research. There's nothing different, it's just the same types of things that you have to do all genealogical research, and especially when you run out of online websites that have the information you need to do your research, then you're going to libraries and archives and looking at the original records as they are made available and available to use. So there's no special key, there's no special uh, something that you have to know that is any different than knowing how to do careful and well documented genealogical research. And that's what will answer the question of whether or not you are related to or had any kind of Indian descent. Okay, well, thanks for watching. And I made a little bit exception here. Normally with all of my presentations, I use my own photography here at the closing as the closing slide, but I still felt like there was a reason for going ahead and use Edward Curtis's pictures for consistently through the presentation. So, okay, anybody have any questions? The question, is there a handout, is always the same question. The answer is yes, there is. It's a copy of the slides, which I will provide and have provided in the past for these. Yeah, so there's there are people who are already into the place of doing the doing DNA testing and using that as kind of a standing point. The advantage, of course, of DNA testing is not that it necessarily, if it shows you have Native American ancestry, it's very, very possible that there are other people who have taken the same test who will show up with the same ancestry, and that those people may be interrelated, so you may have more people to work with on your searching. The New England tribes, there's no difference between doing the research for the New England tribes than there is any other tribes. If your DNA test shows you have Native American, it could be through the DNA, through the ancestry from the New England tribes. The records that are kept are sometimes, I would characterize them as being more than ordinarily difficult to work through, and they may not be as easily found as some of the larger tribes in the West. But they're people who are going to show up on the census records going back to the 1850 census and then on the older census records. And that would be why I have the suggestion that you do that you identify all of the people in your tribe. And if you want to do just one line back and see, and that's the line you think might be the one that goes back to a Native American tribe, then I would encourage you to have for everyone in every family going back in on the generational line, on the bloodline, that you do the census records for every individual. That will give you enough information to see what your previous, who are the previous ancestors are. And if it turns out they're an Indian, then that's what's going to be found. So hope that helps. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you will join us for our next webinar on August 13th with Catherine Grant about getting to know the new merge experience in Family Search Family Tree. A recording of this webinar will be made available by next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fh_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.